Alright everyone, welcome back to the second channel. We're here again with another poem, and this one is called Hitting the Wall by an author named Catie. As for content warnings, there is some talk of blood and inflicting harm. It's not too detailed, says the author. Alright, great. And before we get into the piece, keep in mind I am not a professional reviewer. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself, just keep writing. And for those in the comments, please be respectful. Also, I'm so sorry for any mistakes or mispronunciations of names or words. If I come across a word that I don't want to say for whatever reason, I will replace it with the word blank. Alright, with that, let's get into the poem. I will give it an initial reading, and then we can pick it apart. So, there's this wall. It towers over me. It seems to wrap around my mind, to be built around my body. I love the way it looks, and when it looks at me, it fulfills my needs to want to need. But he doesn't seem to want to need me. He stands alone or with friends, but he doesn't want to stand with me. I want to hit a wall. I want the bricks to lacerate my knuckles. I want to feel the blood warm my fingertips, to see the pool of red from at edge of my feet. To see the pool of red form at edge of my feet. To feel the purple bruises even days after. I want to relish in the way the color changes, to feel the impact minutes after it happened, to fall to the ground, gripping my wrist, to sit in the blood on the ground. Let the puddle grow as I realize what I did, and with a swollen hand, I want to pick at the healing scabs, just to remember how good the pain felt. I want to hit a wall. I want to put a hole right through it. I want to hurt it just like it did to me. I want him to see the blood run, to feel the warmth of it, to watch as it pools on the floor, to watch the bruises never heal, to feel the pain he causes me, the pain I feel as he stands there, knowing how he makes me feel, just deciding only to ignore it, to tell all my friends about her, knowing it would get back to me, knowing how it would hurt me. I want a wall to hit me. I want a wall to push me over, to kick me while I'm down. I want a wall to hurt me. I want him to hurt me. At least then he'd talk to me. He'd feel me. He'd want me. I know it's not healthy to dream of him, to wish to be with him, even if it's not good for me. It's not healthy. I'm not healthy. I can't even think straight. It's not even about a wall. Okay, let's get into it. So, first impression, and I think I've probably brought this up, like, in every video on this channel, but, your poem, your first line, and your title for that matter, are introductions, right? You're introducing your reader to the work via the title and via the first line of the poem, and so, probably in your high school English classes, you had a teacher who said that you should start your essays with a hook. Well, it's the same with really any piece of literature, even a poem. You really wanna kind of hook the reader. You wanna rope them in, right? And so the title, Hitting the Wall, at least that's what the document was named, so I assume that's what the title of the piece is. Hitting the Wall is a decent title, I think. It's okay. The first line, I think, leaves a little something to be desired. But I don't mind the tone, actually. I sorry, I laugh because the phrase, "So, there's this wall," it reminds me of that meme. I think it's no, I forget who the celebrity is, but it's some celebrity, some pop star, and she's, like, pushing her hair behind her ears and, like, acting flattered and shy, and the caption is like, "So there's this blank," right? I'm trying to think of a specific example of that meme, but I can't. Oh, no, 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 wait. Like, for people who their jaw clicks, right? There's a version of that meme that's like, "So there's this clicking sound when I open my mouth." Anyway, Was that, enough of a tangent to start this whole thing? So, anyway, all I mean to say is I like the tone here. It feels kind of, like, conversational and even, like, a little upbeat almost, especially compared to what we're gonna see in the rest of the poem, and also the phrase, like, "There's this blank." It's like for me personally, and I think other people would think similarly, I immediately associate with that with, romance, with a crush. So there's this guy, so there's this girl, right? That sort of thing. Um, and of course, it seems like a lot of the subject matter here does have to do with romance, so feels related at least. That being said, I think potentially there could be a more interesting way to open this poem, but that's just my initial 2 cents. Now, with the repetition, if you are a fan of my stuff, you know that repetition's not my favorite, but I don't know, in this piece, it wasn't so bad, I thought, like, it never felt too unnecessary, which I think a lot of repetition does. I feel like that's kind of my main problem with repetition in poetry is, like, a lot of the times when you see repeated words or phrases, it's like, how necessary was it to repeat those words or phrases, right? And obviously, that's probably gonna depend on you as the reader, but this piece was reminding me of a piece by Dorothy Lasky. Let me see if I can find it, hang on. Okay, yeah, so this is a piece by Lasky called "The Wall Hanging I Never Noticed," and I'm just gonna read it real quick, and maybe, like, not really compare it to this piece that we're looking at here, but basically, I'm gonna read it, and maybe you, the viewer, can see why this piece we're reading reminded me of Dorothy Lasky's poem here. I never noticed before how the red flowers hang from the blue branches. I never noticed before the light in this room. I never noticed the way the air is cool again. I never noticed anything but you, but you, but you, so that I couldn't sleep. I never noticed what was anything but you, until I noticed you, and could not help it. Until I noticed you, I could not help it. Until you made the red flowers alive again. Until the blue branches, the lemons you loved, but also the way you loved me too. Until all of this, I never noticed you. But once I did, I never minded noticing. I never stopped noticing. Until I noticed you. I never stopped noticing. Until you, I never stopped. So, I don't love all the repetition in that poem. At the beginning especially, I just don't love the phrase, "I never noticed," being repeated in those first 5 lines over and over again. That's really just kind of a personal preference thing. But most of the other repetitions in this poem, they really work for me, and especially at the end when the phrases kind of take on more than one meaning. So, like, I never minded noticing, I never stopped noticing. Until I noticed you, I never stopped noticing. Until you, I never stopped. There are a lot of ways I feel like we can interpret the phrasing there and the ordering of those words and their reordering, right? It's really interesting, and, I encourage you to look up the poem. I'll say it again. It's called "The Wall Hanging I Never Noticed" by Dorothy Lasky, and, I had another point there. Oh, yeah, the enjambment. So where each line ends also kind of adds to, okay, well, what does this phrase actually mean? Like the very last 2 lines, are we supposed to read it as "I never stopped noticing until you"? Like, are we supposed to take those together? We don't know for sure because there's a line break right there, and it could be that we're supposed to keep them separate, right? And so that's kind of what some of the repetition in this poem that we're looking at here reminded me of. So let's get back to it. So we'll take it piece by piece. So there's this wall. It towers over me. It seems to wrap around my mind, to be built around my body. Um, I would say wrap around, or no, sorry. I would say it towers over me is kind of a cliche. I think there could be a more interesting way to phrase that. Wrap around my mind is not so bad. I would build on that a little further though. Um, because, I think when we think of a wall and later we get the notion that this is a brick wall, and so immediately we think, okay, it's tall and it's sturdy and it's immobile, right? but then suddenly if it's wrapping around the speaker's mind, okay, maybe it's not as immobile as we thought it was. Maybe it can move, maybe it's a little flexible, which is interesting, right? So yeah, that's something you could build on because it's rather curious. I love the way it looks, and when it looks at me, it fulfills my need to want to need, but he doesn't seem to want to need me. He stands alone or with friends, but he doesn't want to stand with me. So there are a few phrases like this last line of the first stanza here that I think are just a little too didactic, if I'm being honest. It's like we kind of get this sense, we get the feel of what this line is saying right here, and then we get it many more times throughout the rest of the poem. And I can't, I feel like I've said this in one of my main channel videos, but now I can't remember. The worst crime an author can commit is telling the audience something they already know. That's not me. That's just like general writing advice. That's something I've heard in my writing classes and in YouTube videos or whatever. And so it's like we know how this male subject feels about the speaker, and yet we get that information multiple times over. And if the language is interesting enough, then I suppose it's fine, right? But we'll see. Um, as for these lines where we kind of repeat want and need, it fulfills my need to want to need. That reads decently, if I'm being honest. I don't dislike the rhythm there. But he doesn't seem to want to need me. That one feels slightly weaker. Probably subjective of me to say though, as if everything I've said hasn't already been subjective. Um, it's like it feels kinda like a song. Those almost sound like song lyrics where, again, it feels like the kinda thing we could phrase a little more uniquely, right? Um, as for this line, "When it looks at me," it being the wall, right? That's another thing we could build on is the personification of this wall. Like, to what extent is this wall a living thing? To what extent is it human? That would be interesting to explore more, right? Second stanza. I want to hit a wall. I want the bricks to lacerate my knuckles. Good word, lacerate. That jumped out to me on the first reading. I want to feel the blood warm my fingertips, to see the pool of red from it. Yeah, so I think we need the word the here, and I think that was one reason that this whole line kind of tripped me up when I was reading it. So to see the pool of red form at the edge of my feet, to feel the purple bruises even days after. I want to relish in the way the color changes. That's a pretty good line. That is interesting. That feels like the kind of thing like I haven't really read a lot of before. Like in a general sense, I've read a lot about, I don't know, pain, injury, right? It's pretty common, honestly, for poems, especially like contemporary poems, to include kind of these little scenes of violence almost, or self-harm, for that matter, right? Which is kind of what this is, right? Like a form of self-harm in the context of the poem anyway. Um, but this idea, I want to relish in the way the color changes. Well, for one thing, I think you can delete in right there. You could just say, I want to relish the way the color changes. But the idea itself, I think, is quite interesting. And like you could build on. That's another thing you could build on, right? Like give me more imagery about the color changing because most of the rest of the imagery in this stanza feels just slightly repetitive, redundant. Um, it's hard because, like, imagery is great. It's one of my biggest weaknesses, honestly. I want to be incorporating more imagery into my poems, and so the fact that you can, like this, that's great. This is a really great basis. But it's the thing I said earlier, right? It's like, are we learning something new with the imagery, or is it just kind of more of the same, right? Are we being told something that we already know? Uh, and also when it comes to, like, something new, it's like, does this read differently enough from other poems? Uh, and keep in mind, again, I'm gonna re-emphasize, I'm speaking from a place of personal preference, right? So, for other people, this language will sound, like, really unique and will probably hit really close to home, but, for me, I don't know, I feel a bit of a disconnect, I suppose. So, To feel the impact minutes after it happened, to fall to the ground, gripping my wrist, to sit in the blood on the ground. Let the puddle grow as I realize what I did, and with a swollen hand, I want to pick at the healing scabs, just to remember how good the pain felt. Yeah, so that, again, that just feels like a sentiment I've seen in lots of other poems, right? But yeah, again, that's me saying that. For other people, that might not be the case. Um, so yeah, ultimately with that stanza, I just reiterate, like, how can we make this imagery unique? And it's hard, like, writing anything unique is hard, but even imagery can be very difficult. So, basically, what I would like to see personally from this stanza is, um, imagery that doesn't kind of repeat the same sentiment over and over again, um, and also imagery that sounds different from other poems that I've read, and that's a big ask, and, like, obviously, you shouldn't be catering your poem just to me. So, like I said, this might work really well for a lot of other people, but for me, it does just kinda sound like, in a lot of ways, things I've heard before. Not all of it, right? Like, I highlighted this line, "I want to relish in the way the color changes." That I've never really heard anything like that before. You can build on that. And, there may be some other images here, that are worth keeping for sure. Like, I highlighted also the word lacerate is really good. I want the bricks to lacerate my knuckles. I think that's a good, like, visceral image for sure. But, the other images just almost kind of repeat the same sentiment in a way. Also, a lot of these lines start with the same phrases, either "I want" or the word "to," and so that kind of adds to the feeling of redundancy a little bit for me. So, yeah. 3rd stanza, "I want to hit a wall. I want to put a hole right through it. I want to hurt it just like it did to me. I want him to see the blood run, to feel the warmth of it, to watch as it pools on the floor." Okay, so that line in particular is, like, really similar to one up here, isn't it? Or am I Yeah, kind of, "To see the pool of red form at the edge of my feet." Maybe it's, specifically the word pool, and it's like, we just got a lot of imagery about the injuries, like, how much more of it do we actually need in this stanza? Maybe this stanza should be more focused on what the speaker hopes the reaction is, right? Not the reaction in themselves and in their body, but, they want this hymn to see the whole thing. And why? What do you want the reaction to be, right? I think that's probably what the stanza should be more focused on, seeing as we got a lot of, bodily imagery in the last stanza already, but that being said, to feel the pain he causes me, the pain I feel as he stands there, knowing how he makes me feel, just deciding only to ignore it, to tell all my friends about her, knowing it would get back to me, knowing how it would hurt me. Okay, so this actually reminds me, the Lana Del Rey video I just did. In that poem, Lana Del Rey refers to, or sorry, in Bare Feet on Linoleum, Lana refers to someone very specifically as she in the middle of the poem, very much like what we're seeing here. And a lot of people took, well, maybe not a lot, but a few commenters took issue with the fact that I said that Lana wasn't being specific enough. The problem for me was that Lana was clearly referring to somebody very specific late into the poem and kind of just wrote the poem as if she expected us to know whom she was talking about. So that was kind of my issue there, was that she was kind of hoping for a very narrow interpretation, but then didn't give enough details to allow for that interpretation, right? And this almost feels like the same thing happening here. This kind of almost feels like to a lesser extent, because I think we can kind of still put the puzzle together with all the details we have here. It's like the speaker seems to be in love with a man who treats her poorly, and this man is with somebody else, knowing that it will hurt the speaker. So we kind of get that sense, but there's also still that same factor that was in Lana's poem, where it's like we're referring to very specific things and pretty late into the poem at that, and so it's potentially jarring for a reader, right? That being said, I kind of think we have enough here. Um, it did just catch me off guard initially, right? For a new character to come into play here. So, something to consider there. Um, yeah, I think we'll move to the last stanza with that. I want a wall to hit me. I want a wall to push me over, to kick me while I'm down. I want a wall to hurt me. I want him to hurt me. At least then he'd talk to me. He'd feel me. He'd want me. I know it's not healthy to dream of him, to wish to be with him. Even if it's not good for me, it's not healthy. I'm not healthy. I can't even think straight. It's not even about a wall. So again, with this final line, feels a little too didactic, right? It's like, we know that it's not about a wall. I think we understood that. um, so I don't know. You could rephrase this stanza, or sorry, not well, just this line. You could rephrase this line or remove it entirely. I think tying back to the wall is a good idea as a way to end the piece, but to simply say it's not even about a wall, it's just like I think we gathered that. I think there's a more profound revelation or insight that the speaker could have about the wall than to just simply say like it's not real. It was a metaphor, right? We knew. So that's just something to consider about the ending there. Um, the repetition in this stanza is kind of doing it for me. I don't know why for sure. I think it's, one thing about repetition, and I've said this in the main channel videos before, but it really pushes a reader. It's kind of like it invites the reader to speed through the poem, right? Because if I see the repeated phrases, then my eyes go really fast through those phrases, right? It's like, oh, I know what's going to come next because it's being repeated over and over. But here, it seems almost intentionally fast-paced, and, the poem that comes to mind when I say that is "What If" by Shel Silverstein. That poem also feels like one that's meant to be read at a fast pace. It's got a lot of repetition, and it's also about anxiety, right? And so I feel like the repetition here feels purposeful because it's kind of emphasizing the anxieties, right? That being said, we get more of the I want to, I want to. There's a lot of that throughout this poem, and that repetition feels weaker, in my opinion. So that's something to consider. Ultimately, I will say too, with this stanza, like very relatable sentiment, right? I think many of us have been in an unrequited love situation. Probably not one as violent as this, but it's like, when you're in that situation, you just want the person to pay you any attention, right? Even if it's negative attention. And obviously that's not healthy, right? Just as the speaker in this poem says. So it's a very relatable sentiment for sure. That being said, I wish the poem actually focused more on the wall, and I see the bones here of a really, like, interesting, potentially grotesque and weird sort of poem where we have this wall, and the speaker could describe the wall as having, like, human traits, uh, a brick wall that's, like, able to move and able to wrap or, like, coil like a snake, a wall that has eyes that yeah, that looks at the speaker, but, like, really heighten the creepiness of it all, or just the weirdness. I think that would be really unique. Um, and then you can make the whole thing a metaphor for this sort of toxic relationship or unrequited love. You can do that still without even having to mention a man, right? And I mean, that link might seem tenuous, but I promise it'll come to you, and it'll be all the more interesting for it, right? In my mind, I think that would be the sort of poem that lends itself well to a lot of interpretation and a lot of discovery, self-discovery. Um, I think that would be the kind of poem that would invite a reader. It would invite a reader in to read it because it would be very interesting and intriguing, but it would also invite a reader to consider, right? And yeah, the reader might get it wrong because the poem probably wouldn't be as didactic anymore as this one is, but I think that's a worthy risk, right? Anyway, this video, as with any on this channel, highly opinionated, right? I'm really speaking from a place of the things that I like to see in poetry. I like the language to be unique, and I like things to be a little uh, less explicit personally. Not explicit in like a violent sense. You can keep a lot of the violence as long as the language is unique enough, in my opinion. But I don't want things super spelled out for me, right? And I honestly think it's a stronger communication of emotion when we don't spell things out entirely. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I really feel that way. It's like John Green says in his, first crash course video on literature. Um, there are only so many ways to say that somebody broke your heart, right? If I say, "The girl of my dreams broke my heart into a million pieces," that won't resonate, right? Because it sounds really cliche. It sounds like something you've heard before. Whereas if you're in a toxic relationship or if you love someone who doesn't love you back, if you were to describe that as a living wall that keeps like fighting against you and makes you want to hurt yourself against it, that's curious, that piques my interest, that has me listening, right? That's a unique way to describe that situation. So, anyway, I've probably hammered the point home hard enough at this point, but yeah, that would be kinda my main pieces of advice with this poem. And like I said, the bones are really good. There is a really good basis here for a really unique and interesting poem, and already, in a lot of ways, it is interesting and unique, for sure, don't get me wrong. But yeah, those would be my major thoughts here. So keep going with this. I would say just revise it a little further, build on those strengths, and for sure, keep writing. Um, with the repetition, figure out which repetition is working and which repetition isn't. Like which repetition is providing more for the reader to explore, and which repetition is kind of just, I don't know, maybe there for the sake of it, right? So consider those things. Like I said, you got a great basis here. Build on what's strong, and it'll be really, really, really fascinating, I assure you. I guess I can't promise that for certain, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. So, well, we're gonna leave it there. Catie, it is Catie, right? Hang on, let me. Yes, Catie, thank you for submitting this piece. Really, very, very, very brave of you. I hope anything I've said has been helpful, and ultimately, you don't have to take any of this advice at all. If you like it, great. I'm sure a lot of other people will like it, and I'm sure it will strike a chord with a lot of people. Because, like I said, the sentiment is very relatable, and the fact that the relatability shines through, that's great. That means you're on the right track for sure. So, thank you again, Catie. We're going to wrap things up. Thank you for watching, viewers. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments as always. And ultimately, keep in mind this is a rough draft.